Yeah, and we are live. Great. And I shall, let me do one thing. Let me share the screen anywhere right now. So, yeah, and we are live. So just, yeah, and we are live. Great. And I shall, let me do one thing. Let me share the screen anywhere right now. Let me do one thing. Let me share the screen anywhere right now. So, yeah, and we are live. So just, yeah, and we are live. So just, yeah, and we are live. I shall, let me do one thing. Let me share the screen. Let me do one thing. Let me share the screen anywhere right now. Let me do one thing. Let me share the screen anywhere right now. Yeah, and we are live. So just, yeah, and we are live. So just, yeah, and we are live. Just give me a minute, one second. Let me do one thing. Let me share the screen. Let me do one thing. Let me share the screen anywhere right now. Let me do one thing. Let me share the screen anywhere right now. Yeah, and we are live. So just, sorry, there was a lot of feedback noise and all. I was just trying to adjust that. Um, this technical part always takes a little bit of time to adjust. And we are. Are you guys able to see the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So I will just record this. So I've started recording. Okay, great. So happy New Year, everyone. This is the start of a new year for, I mean, obviously the new year itself, but at the same time for Mythematical, the plan that I have. For last year, I was doing a lot of live sessions and all, and this year there are a lot more things that I have in my pipeline. But then again, like, I wanted to begin, and it had been a little bit of a gap right now. I think the last session I did was in November on the Trickster. So the question came, what do we start off with? And I realized that given the recent development with the vaccine and all, it made sense to talk about this anxiety we have, the anxiety that the pandemic has created for us. I think the last year last year got defined by that pandemic, and right now we have this new hope with the vaccine. But this search that we are doing, this need that we have of finding a substance that if consumed can make us immune, it's something that doesn't is not something that's very new. It's something that has gone on, and not just in history but also in mythology. Um, the idea of being immune to something was something that our even mythical ancestors were looking for. Uh, and I mean, the best thing to be immune against is death itself. So the idea of finding this elixir. Now, elixir is itself a Greek word, but it is what you would call amrit, or what any substance that grants you eternal life. In many stories, what is a recurring theme is this idea that um, people are trying to find, gods, mortals, goddesses, creatures, they're all trying to find this substance, this elixir. But what's interesting is there's a difference between wanting to find it, finding it, and keeping it. And at the same time, what's interesting is the stories tell us the different extreme measures that these characters took to finally get this immortality, or even if they didn't, the price they paid for it. So I thought that will be a good idea to explore this. We'll be looking at three stories, one from the Norse mythology, one from the Mesopotamian mythology, and one from a Puranic mythology. Some of the stories may be familiar to you, so I will obviously try to keep it interesting. What I would do is I will go through the story and and maybe towards the end of the story, we can have a discussion. You can ask me any questions you have, or any opinion you have about the characters and all. Um, I would say that due to the I was trying to prepare for this and all, but I'll be referring to my notes because during this week was a little hectic for me to get everything done, and I was still working today evening. So I'm going to be reading out of my notes at times. Hope that doesn't spoil the experience, but I will be communicating with you as much as I can here. Okay. Uh, so looking at the first story of Idunn and the apple. So this story is actually a pretty, a famous story in Norse mythologies. I mean, it doesn't get as much, importance as compared to some of the stories of Odin and all, but it does. While the character Idunn is mentioned, and her, this and this and one more story of hers that she's known for. There are, I mean, there are not many stories of Idun itself. Though she is an important goddess in the Norse pantheon, and this story itself is found in the Prose Edda, the two books that for Norse mythology that are very very important. Two compilations. One is the Prose Edda, and the one is the Poetic Edda. What's interesting is the story is actually told by another. I mean, the way the story is framed is it's actually told by another god, Bragi, who's actually saying Idunn's husband, and he's telling the story in a banquet and all. Okay? So that's the story. Just 1 second. Yeah. Okay. Ro, can you just have a look at if someone's joining in and all? I think I'll begin the story then. Right. So the first story, Idunn and the apple, comes from Norse mythology. Idunn felt that this was it for her. And this may seem ironic, given that she's the goddess of youthfulness and eternal life. But the situation she was in, she realized that her fate was sealed. She was the prisoner of Tjazi, a Jotun, and Jotuns were known to have historical enmity with the Aesir's, her race, and all those who lived in Asgard. But she was alive so far for only one reason. She was a keeper of a wooden box, which had one of the most prized possessions, apples. But these were not any ordinary apples. These apples, one touched by her, would turn golden. And when these golden apples were consumed by the gods, it would return youth to them. So whenever the gods would age, they would eat the apple and retain their youth. It was by this way the Norse deities maintained to stayed immortal, or at least they did plan to do that till Ragnarok would occur. But today there is no god to feed. Idunn is all alone with her apples in a scary open lair under a constant dark skies. How did she end up here, from the safety of her orchard in Asgard to this place, Jotunheim? If only she had not been so trusting. But her mistakes were not only going to cost her, but all the gods and goddesses themselves. And there was only one person to be blamed for this misfortune, the trickster Loki. She still remembers a long time ago when Loki approached her in the Asgardian orchard. And this was peculiar to her, as she had never seen him visit her for any reason. That should have been the first sign of trouble. But she was more curious than concerned. What are you doing here, Loki? Never took you for someone who's very interested in gardening. Loki just smiled. What? Can't a dear old Loki just visit his old friend Idunn? Seriously, Loki, what is it? Okay, fine. I seem to have found the most amazing apple tree out in the forest. You should come see it. Idunn is mildly intrigued, but she countered, Dear Loki, I have my own orchard to tend to. If I don't, then there will be no apples for the next meal for any of the Aesir's. Loki persuaded. Idunn, I swear, I've never seen apples like these. They just seem to be the most delicious things in the world. Sure, Loki, looks like your silver tongue for lying has not left you, Idunn retorted. What? I would never say or do something that is not right. No tricks. Not to you. Not anymore, Loki said sheepishly. Either ways, Loki, I think my apples are sufficient and appetizing. Look, if you don't believe me, why don't you bring your apples to compare them to the apples that I'm going to show you? Idunn should have known better, but he loved apples. Besides, Loki had given up his mischievous ways, or so she thought. So Idunn followed Loki out to the forest, only to be swept, only to come to an area and ask Loki, where exactly are we going? Loki didn't say anything much. Suddenly, an eagle comes in and sweeps her away. Loki! Idunn screams, but Loki just stood there, watching it all as it happened, with a smile on his face. Idunn cried for help, but the speed at which she was being carried, the wind drowned her voice. There is no saving you now. Thiazi has you now, came a sound from the eagle itself. Leave me alone, you filthy Jotun. I am one of the Aesir's. You will pay for this transgression. What do you want from me? Idunn tried wriggling, but she realized that she would fall if she tries to move too much. Thiazi retorted, It's not you who I want, it's what you keep. I know all about it. Idunn looked down at her hands and realized she was still carrying the golden apples. She pondered for a second. Don't even think about throwing it away. It's the only reason you are alive. Thiazi harked back, knowing exactly what she was thinking. But where are you taking me? My home, in Jotunheim, the land of giants. As they started descending, she started seeing what he meant by home. It looked more like a lair. Thiazi dropped her there. Time passed by. Thiazi would come regularly to get a golden apple from her. Every time every time Thiazi would age, he would come and take another golden apple. She was suddenly brought back to the present moment when she heard, when she saw a very strange sight. A falcon? It can't Thiazi in his eagle form. He won't return so early. Normally, this is a time where he goes to the sea for hunting. But it surely looked like a falcon. But it was something else, or someone else. The falcon now descended and perched right beside her, transforming into a familiar figure. You, wretched creature! How dare you show up after what you did? Idunn swore. She was so angry she didn't realize that she just threw an apple which found Loki's head as a target. Ow! Okay, wait, I deserve that, Loki replied, turning from a falcon back to his true form. But listen to me, I'm here to what? What game are you playing, Loki? Wait, how are you falcon? Isn't that Freya's animal? And do you know what you've caused? What kind of damage have you caused here? Loki sighed. I do. Look, for the first time, the Asgard is defenseless. The Aesir's are fading and are aging. All Father Odin, his eyes are glowing glassy, and he is not able to see or foresee anything. He's not able to predict the next attack when that can happen. Heimdall, his ears grow faint, and he has even left the Bifrost gate unguarded. The war god Tyr, his back grows weak, and he walks with a stool. Freya has lost all her hair and beauty, which I must tell you does not suit a goddess of love. And since she is also the goddess of fertility, all the vegetation in the world is dying. And Bragi, her husband, has lost all his teeth and he can barely speak, let alone sing. Oh no, poor Bragi. Idunn gasped. It's a terrible curse for a god of poetry to have. And then there's Thor. What about Thor? What happened to him and his strength? Idunn asked alarmingly. Well, he seemed to have completely lost control of his bowel movement, which just smells terribly. Idunn just gave a cold stare. She was in no mood to joke. Okay, Idunn, I mean that all gods are growing weak and they're all they're decaying, except you, because since you are a half Jotun and rotten to the core, conspiring with Thiazi. It's not like that. Listen, I'll explain everything, but we got to go. I'm here to rescue you. What? I'm not going anywhere with you, Loki. Loki looked impatient and scared. Idunn, please. Oh God, I think Thiazi is going to be here soon. Look, I'm sorry for this, but I have to do this for your own protection. Before Idunn could react, she noticed Loki turning back into her falcon, but then she realized that she and her apple were also turning into something tiny. Loki grabbed her with his falcon talons uh, and swept into the skies. A nut? Seriously, Loki? You transform me into a nut? Idunn screamed. It was the only way to hide you and carry you back. Oh no, I think Thiazi is right behind us. Idun just was completely surprised and confused. I don't get it. I thought you were working with Thiazi and now you're running away from him. What are you not telling me? Look, Idun, a long time ago, Odin, me, and Hjörnir uh, were traveling through the mountains and we came upon a wilderness and we needed food. In a valley, we saw a herd of oxen, and we took one of the oxen and set it on the earth oven. But we found out it wasn't cooking. As we tried to determine the reason for why this was happening, we heard something talking in the oak tree above us, saying that he himself was responsible for the oven for not cooking. We looked up and we saw it was Thiazi in the form of a great eagle, and he told us that he would that if we would let him eat the best part of ox meat first, then he would let the oven cook. Having no choice, we agreed. So he came down and he began devouring large portions of the meal. But he ate so much that I became angry, and I grabbed a long stick and I struck him. But the stick stuck to his body with some kind of magic, and he took flight and he started carrying me with him. As I flew on the land, as I flew over the land, I shouted and began to beg him to let me down. But Thiazi had one condition. What condition? Idunn asked, fearing the answer. That I lure you out of Asgard with your apple of youth. I didn't have a choice. It was the only way. Thiazi wanted you. Idunn wanted to say something, but then she kept quiet for a second. Okay, look, that explains why you tricked me and got me kidnapped. And I will see you about that. But why the rescue operation? Look, I just felt bad for what I did. The truth, Loki. The truth. Okay. Look, after a while, the Asgard started wondering where you were, and senile as they may have been, they realized that they really needed my help. You mean they still had the brains to pick up the pieces, and they realized that the last person to see me with was you. Yes, stupid Heimdall can't hear anything, but he was still very observant as ever. Anyway, Anyway, the All-Father threatened to cut my tongue if I didn't bring him back and lock me away for thousands of years. They found me, and I told them what I had done and why I did it. But I told them I also had a way to bring you back. I just needed to borrow Freya's falcon skin. His story was interrupted by a loud shriek from behind. Thiazi was gaining on them. "Oh no, I think he's going to catch up with us," said Loki. Idunn screamed. "You know, for a nut, you're a pretty loud person. Anyway, there is a plan." Loki flew as quickly as his wings could carry him when he reached the outer rims of the Asgard. He dove down what seemed like a wall of dry wood. "All Father, now!" Loki screamed. Down below, Odin called all the gods. All of them raised the torches of fire. Loki was beating his wings almost to exhaustion. The eagle was just 3 sides behind them. At that very moment, Loki cleared the wall, and the gods set the wall on flames, creating a ring of fire, in the air. Before Thiazi could slow down, he flew right into the flames. His beautiful feathers caught the flames, and he died in the air, fallen to the ashes in the ground. Loki returned Idunn to her original form. "For the record, this was my idea, and I saved you." Looking back at Loki, Idunn said, "From a trouble that you caused, Loki, but nothing less should have been expected from you. Now let me save our race." She looked around, and she could barely recognize anyone. So she quickly attended to the gods and returned them to the youth by passing an apple for them to bite. She returned with her husband Bragi, whose arms she fell into. She was home again, and the Aesir's were once again immortal. Thank you. So before we begin the other story, wanted to know your opinions, perspective. I see there are some comments. I'll just okay. Sorry, was there any? I'm just seeing some other messages. Yeah. Okay. Great. I hope you guys found it interesting. I do want to mention that Norse mythology, Norse stories are generally very, very strange. I mean, the story doesn't end here. The story, Thiazi's daughter Skaldi, she actually comes and she wages a war, and a very strange thing happens. But anyway, that's a story for another time. But the stories always seem very, sometimes they seem very disjointed, and they seem very, very, they seem very strange. But in their strangeness, the Norse mythology, there's a very human element to the gods. What's very interesting is that each of the gods, they have their own high and low moments. And Loki, as you saw here, being a trickster god, is someone who's who always gets into trouble, causes trouble, and then he gets everyone out of the trouble. um, it's a mystery that why the Asgardians actually keep Loki. But then, given the fact that how the mythology progresses, there is a time when Loki overdoes it, and he ends up hurting someone really badly. So this is a story that comes from an earlier time. It's comparatively on a lighter note, even though there's kidnapping and all required. Um, yeah, just for everyone, I didn't talk too much about Norse mythology. I wanted to get you more into the story itself. But Norse mythology is the mythology that comes from the Scandinavian countries, the Norway, Iceland, other places, and all. And it also has, like like you have the Puranic mythology, whether like you have the Greek mythology. It has a pantheon of gods, a sort of a family tree of gods, starting with Odin, and then his one of his most famous son called Thor, who also controls thunder, and a lot of other gods. Freya, there is Heimdall, there's Loki also. So all of them, this thing, all of them have their own personality and quirks. One thing important to understand about Norse mythology is, unlike the Indian gods or the Greek gods, where there's a god of, the idea that certain things are associated with the gods is not something that's a very Norse idea. Like, the gods have a personality and they do manage a few things. But so, example, Thor is actually not a god of thunder. He manages thunder. He can control thunder, but he's not an embodiment of thunder himself. The same thing for Idunn. She's someone who can manage youth, or she has it's almost like a skill set. So that's the story of Norse mythology and all. And yeah, I mean, that's how the gods stayed immortal. And at one point in time, they were going to lose everything and they were going to die. But luckily, or no thanks to Loki, they were able to become young again. So that was the story. I guess we can move on to the next story. Any of you have any questions or anything?
Yes. The apple means youthfulness, right?
Sorry, what?
The apple, I don't like. She used to own it. It's for youthfulness, right? It's not for immortality.
Yeah. So that's actually a very interesting point. I mean, it depends on your definition of immortality. It's not for, technically what the apple does is it returns them back to youth. So the way the Asgardians are using it is basically like every time they age, they come back to a certain youth, and they're basically scaling their time back, right? So in a way, they become immortal and they appear immortal to everyone else. So you're technically right, but I would say that for all intents and purposes, for all of us mortals, the gods would live for 1,000 years and they would just look the same. So isn't that youth itself?
Yeah. Immortality means if once you eat that fruit, then you're never going to age or like you're never going to die. But
That's an interesting point. I mean, that also brings up to the question of how you see immortality. What exactly? Because I mean, the concept of being immortal. So I have a question. If imagine someone strikes you and you die, and then you are after 24 hours you're brought back to life. Are you immortal, or would you say that because you died you are just resurrected? So um, there's a difference between the terms actually. Sometimes the idea of eternal life, the idea of being invincible, the idea of being immortal. And by the way, there's a big difference between biological immortality and uh, like living through, like your soul living through. If you think about
spiritual immortality, yeah.
Exactly, because if you look at the idea of the Purana, like the Indian mythology and all, the idea that soul lives forever,
Yeah.
sort of a thing, is soul is immortal, not away. So it does bring an interesting question and point. What do you consider, or is this a cheating that you're calling something immortal but it's not?
Yeah.
Um,
Actually, I was just thinking like every time only if they eat the fruit, they seem to be immortal, but they're not actually immortal. You ask the question that if I die and then after 24 hours I gain back my own life, well, that is immortality, right? Like I'm not fully dead. I'm still able to come back.
No, definitely. I'll see. It's a personal opinion also, right? Like how you see
Yeah.
immortal sort of a thing. I mean, and also the different types of immortality that can exist itself. Now in Norse, I guess they didn't have this idea of someone staying constant and all. It was always the idea of someone returning back and all, which I think makes the story fun in its own way, because then there's always a risk of you losing that thing that you have.
But actually, I'm actually an Indian. Not like in Indian history, there's actually yeah. You might be heard of Mahabharata, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, in that actually there is one guy like Ashwatthama. He's still an immortal and he's still alive. So maybe that's immortality according to me.
No,
Like
that's great. It's good to know how you see immortality. But see, that's another thing I would say. Like different mythologies have a very different rules of the story structure works in a very different way. Okay.
yeah,
I mean even the concept of worship, even the concept of what exactly it is a god. So I would definitely urge you that it's good that to have a point of view about a thing, and especially coming from Indian mythology. I know as Indians we tend to think of our mythology as a default, but if you look at different civilizations and all, and try to understand how they have thought about it, it can bring new ideas and sometimes, a very creative way of looking at life and death itself.
Yeah.
Uh,
Thank you.
so just looking at a kind of question. So Ro asked, where do these stories show up today in today's context, grandma tales, religious spaces and all? So Norse mythology is not going to be religious, Ro. So I think Norse, the Norse civilization, like, the Vikings were at their peak in the 9th to 13th century, actually before the 9th century and all. But many of the stories were actually written by the Christian missionaries in the 11th century. So it's almost like, almost 200 to 700 centuries later, someone is writing it with a Christian lens. And many of the stories, when you look at it, even the idea of Odin being more important and all, seems like they were trying to put the lens of Greek and Christian on top of it. So we'll never know. We know that Thor was probably worshipped and all. Odin was worshipped, but we don't know about Loki. Was Loki worshipped? Because there's no temples or any archaeological evidence that's found that Loki was worshipped. It's lost to time, and many of the stories are very incomplete. So there's always that, we don't know what that story originally intended or what it meant. Okay, so I have another comment. The Norse, the Norse gods are divided into two families, the Vanir. Yeah, so Saurabh, you're completely right. There's Vanir and Essiers. I did not want to go too much in detail because it would have been very confusing if I spoke about the pantheon. So, like, who are the Vaniers and who are the Essiers and how did they mix around and all. But I do, I do want to bring up a point. I mentioned the word Jotun, which is translated to being a giant. So Tyadzi is a giant, but that's not a very accurate translation. That's like saying devtas in Indian mythology are angels and asuras are demons, which is a wrong translation, right? Because both of them are children of Brahma, and they don't have. It's not like asuras are evil, because there's no concept of evil in in Hindu mythology. They just do like bad things at times, and and there's always a clash between them. The same thing goes for the in the Norse mythology. The Asiers, Vanniers, Jotuns, all these are different races. There's no, in fact, many times, Loki has a Jotun father. Okay, so it's a it's something that it's like a different different ethnicity, different groups and sort of a thing. So they don't look different out of the way and all. It's something that our modern perception and the modern things we tend to depict the especially the Marvel Cinematic Universe has depicted the giants in like a sort of a blue and big creatures and all, and ACs are all looking humans. So anyway, let's move ahead. I will cover the next story, and hope you guys enjoy this one too. So this story, just to give a little bit of a context, this story comes from the story of Gilgamesh, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Now, Epic of Gilgamesh, one of apart from being a fascinating story, what makes it truly marvelous is that it's the oldest epic that we have in the world. At least we found so far. Yes, it's older than Mahabharata and all. Also, Gilgamesh, the earliest tracing of the tablets and all can be traced back to almost 4,000 years back, itself, like 2000 BC and all. Comparatively, Ramayana and Mahabharata, at least the earliest evidence we have, I won't get into the details of whether they had thousands, how many years back they were actually constructed, but the earliest evidence we have is only 500, 500 BC to 500 AD and all. That's when it got documented. And they became like itihas, at least in Indian in Indian mythology. So yeah, so Gilgamesh is one of the earliest stories, and it's a very fascinating journey. It's a journey about a man who's looking for immortality. Okay, so I'll begin the story. After having suffered and traveled away from his kingdom of Uruk, King Gilgamesh was finally able to listen to the story of the great flood and the god's gift of immortality from the lips of Utnapishtim itself, the lone survivor. The journey to Utnapishtim, since it began with Enkidu's death, had made Gilgamesh question the fragility of life itself. Nothing, not even his kingdom, seemed to be more valuable than having life. Enkidu was this wild man that Gilgamesh had fought in his first encounter, and soon after that, ironically, they became best of friends, and they went on many adventures, fighting monsters like the famous monster Hambaba, and they killed in the cedar forest. Enkidu was the wild man who the gods cursed and took away from Gilgamesh to punish him. Gilgamesh was completely upset and he mourned Enkidu's death for a long time. He abandoned all his kingly duties and everything. And in search for an answer, because Enkidu's death made him realize made him aware of his own mortality. And in search for an answer for the quest for immortality, and not wanting to meet the same fate as his best friend, he began this eventful journey away from Uruk, um, and had his own adventures. He defeated a lion at a mountain pass. Upon reaching the mountain of Mashu, Gilgamesh had encountered a scorpion man and woman, and after he told them his purpose, they allowed him to pass. He had wandered through the darkness for 12 days before he could even see light, and he met this divine being named Siduri, who he found in a garden, and for the first time she prevented him from entering the garden, but upon his insistence and upon him telling his purpose of what he's out for, he's looking for immortality. Siduri guided him to the name Utnapishtim, telling him, Utnapishtim being one of his ancestors, is the only person to have gained immortality. And this led Gilgamesh across the sea to Utnapishtim's homeland. But the story of Utnapishtim, when Utnapishtim told him about the great floods, revealed that the gods had promised never to do a flood, or never to flood the world again, and so the chances of being a survivor and getting immortality as a reward was bleak at best. Still, he listened to the story with a great interest, but he was really exhausted. After all, he had done a long and hard journey, and his eyes were weighing down very heavy. He was feeling very sleepy. Now, Utnapishtim saw this about his guest, and he said, King Gilgamesh, you wish to live forever, but you can't even stay up. So let's try a test. Let's see if you can manage to sleep for 7 days. For if you do not have the strength to stay awake for a week, how do you hope to stay alive for all the time? Gilgamesh accepted the challenge, but his eyes were almost closed and his chin was sinking into his chest. Utnapishtim told his wife, let's keep a count of how many days he sleeps. For every morning, let's bake a loaf of bread, and leave it resting near his head. If he does not if he does not wake up and eat it, do not take it away, even though it may go hard and stale. Leave it there and bake a bread the very next day. Now, Utnapishtim's wife, she did as she was told. After Gilgamesh had slept for a whole day and night, she left a loaf of bread by his head, and then he slept another night and day, and then another, and sometimes he would just be snoring and sleeping. And every time, Utnapishtim's wife would keep making a piece of bread. Finally, the king Gilgamesh woke up after a week of sleeping and noticed 7 loaves of bread were waiting near his head. 6 of them were already stale and rotting, but the last one was the fresh one. Gilgamesh stretched out his arms and yawned and said, "Oh, I must have just nodded off for a moment." Uttapishtim laughed. Ha! Count the loaves. They're the number of days you slept. 7 days in total. When Gilgamesh saw this, he realized it was true. Only the 7th loaf was still soft and moist. The sixth one was getting stale. The 5th one was even staler. The 4th one started having mold growing on it. The 3rd one the third one started having maggots, and the second one had a foul smell, and the first one was just completely rotten. Time had done its damage. Like the bread, there was no escape from it, Gilgamesh realized. The life in a body was marked on a similar journey as the bread's until it was completely decayed and gone. Gilgamesh wept and cried, Utnapishtim, where shall I go? What shall I do? For I don't even have the strength to stay awake. How do I plan to possibly live forever? How can I do that? He looked at the bread and he kept thinking, and he wondered about the concept of death. He wondered that, is his fate destined to go into the underworld? Uttapishtim looked at his guest and saw that he was feeling very sad. So, in a more empathic voice, he said, Gilgamesh, since you've traveled a lot and you've traveled so many miles, perhaps your journey is not completely useless. Um, you see no chance of conquering death, but I should let you on a secret. There is another way. There is a plant that grows under the sea. It has thorn like a rose that will prick your hand if you grab hold of it. But if you succeed in taking it, the plant can restore your youth and strength forever, or it can keep doing that. Gilgamesh brightened with this news. Wait, there is such a plant? I must get it. Will you help me? Where can I get it? Utnapishtim ordered Urshanabi, the sea captain or the boatman, to take Gilgamesh in his boat at the place where the sea parts and where the plant grows. Gilgamesh and Urshanabi sailed to that place. Gilgamesh dove from the side of the boat and swam towards the bottom of the sea. So deep was the sea that he had to tie something on his leg so as to keep sinking in. Finally, he saw the plant that he was looking for, and he was able to bring the plant back to the surface. He sat down on the boat again and he examined the plant. And he said to himself, what kind of a seaweed is this? I'm told that this contains the secret of youth itself, Ushanabi. But you know what? I shall return with this to Uruk, my kingdom, where I shall plant this. I shall keep feeding this plant a little by little, and I'll grow more plants. And I shall even give this to an ancient shepherd I know who must be 100 by now. If he sheds his age and returns to youth, I know that this is magical indeed. Then I shall eat it and I shall be young again. Oshanabi tells him, why not eat it right now? Why wait for such a long time? But Gilgamesh was excited with the idea of not losing the plant and just having it one point of time. He wanted to ensure that there is more of that plant. So he went towards the land, and he walked for a few miles until he stopped for at a night for a fresh pool of water. His limbs were completely hot and weary through the journey, and the water just seemed very tempting. So he decided to go wash himself. He kept the plant on the side of the pool, and Gilgamesh went ahead to take a bath. Suddenly, a snake slithers and finds the plant while Gilgamesh was having a bath. And the snake comes near the plant, smells it, and then ends up consuming it before completely going away. Its old wrinkly skin began to be very loose and started crumpling. And soon the snake just slithered out of its old skin with a fresh, new, youthful skin. And it is from that time onwards, snakes have always been able to shed the skin. Now, when Gilgamesh came out of the water and saw the plant of immortality completely gone, stolen by none other than a snake, he wept and he wailed very bitterly. To what end did I make this long and weary journey? What was the purpose of me having suffered so much? I have gained nothing, no advantage at all. I have lost, I won and lost the secret of youth, and I'm no better than what I was before. Old age and death still await me. One day I shall turn into clay like all men were. What is the point of all this? Urshanabi didn't say anything. He just took Gilgamesh and dropped him near Uruk through the boat. In the morning, Gilgamesh started walking until he came upon the chariot that he had left at the shore. He was completely weary and all hopes were lost. Onwards, he walked for 7 days and 7 nights until he chanced upon the glistening city of Uruk, where the shepherds came in with the sheep. He sat down on the top of the hill and looked at the city. And he then spoke with pride. There lies the glistening city of Uruk. If you climb over the battlements and walk around, you can see 1 square mile in size. You can see the juggernaut. You can see the green orchards just as big. You can see the vast quarries which are dug out in the clay to build the houses. You can see the temple of Ishtar, the goddess, and its lovely ground. And it is of this place that I am the king, the one who saw the creation of the city. And moreover, this city shall live forever. It was then Urshanabi just realized something, that his fame would last beyond him. He understood that his name and his story shall live with him forever. And in this moment, all he wanted to do was remember the adventures he had with his friend uh, and his close companion, Enkidu. And he just hoped that the story of how he met Enkidu and how they went on for adventures will be told again and again. He finally went to the city and he sat down looking at the horizon. And he thought about all that had happened, how he had searched for immortality, how it was stolen by the snake. And then he realized the point, that he will live through his reputation. That was his immortal legacy. So I hope you guys like that story too. Uh, I really find one thing very interesting about Mesopotamian mythology. It's becoming one of my favorite mythologies. Is that it's so poignant and it kind of subverts so many of the tropes you think about. Like, I mean, the story of Gilgamesh starts off as I mentioned. It starts off with the idea that Enkidu and they clash. Um, Originally, the story, in more detail, it's about Enkidu, the creation of Enkidu, who's created with the purpose of destroying Gilgamesh. And finally, they meet and they fight and they match for strength. And suddenly, they become friends, which is so surprising. And so the story goes from being a epic war clash to being a buddy comedy almost in the middle, and then suddenly turns into a drama where Enkidu dies, and you're like, there's a story of loss, and it's not a romantic story. I mean, yes, you can obviously read erotic underlying themes into all these, but at least by the scriptures and all, the story just talks about two friends who were very comfortable with each other. They were very physically intimate with each other and all, and they really loved each other a lot. Okay. There's even a story of Enkidu being welcomed by Gilgamesh's mother and all. So the part of the story you saw is towards the end. What also does happen is that while obviously in my retelling I did conclude it, the original scriptures lose all coherence as soon as Gilgamesh comes back. The scriptures go very crazy. Suddenly Enkidu is alive and his ghost is coming, and then there's Ishtar and Gilgamesh are talking very nicely to each other, even though they had a problems with each other. So what the many of the archaeologists and all feel is that the actual scriptures were lost. The tablets that were there were lost, and some people were just reiterating the tablets that were already there before. So we'll never know the actual how it's supposed to end. What happens to Gilgamesh, and does Enkidu come back, or is it just someone who's just modifying a retelling? So yeah, that was.
This gives a new aspect to the snake.
Yeah, I know, right? That's suddenly
Yeah.
snakes always come and do this. which is interesting because snakes also make a feature also in the Puranic mythology. In another story, I'll definitely cover that up. But snakes get a really bad rep. But to be honest, I mean, do you blame the snake? I blame or
Oh,
do you blame Gilgamesh? I mean,
I blame. Actually, it's just
yeah, it's
we
blame is a
can't
strong word. Hmm.
blame anyone. It's just how it has to be.
That's true. And I mean,
It's good that the snake took it because now with the snake, like actually, I was thinking like, so this can also be a reason why snakes are shedding their own skins.
that's what the mythology says. That this is the reason why snakes had other thing. But what's completely endearing about Gilgamesh is that even though he's this amazing character and he's a hero, he's not a typical hero. He's the hero who makes so many mistakes.
Yeah,
I mean, like he wins something and then he loses it. He decides to he's not able to just stay up even though he's this thing, which is almost very human of him, right? Like it's almost like how we go about our life. I think about this story in a very pandemic world that we have so many plans and we want to do so many things. We want to manage this thing. We want the 8 hours of our work to be very perfect and all. And like Gilgamesh, we probably fall short of it, and we blame ourselves. Um, so that's something that's interesting.
he also gave us a lesson that not physical immortality is important. The way he lived is like what everyone has told till now.
That's true. That's the thing, which goes back to the conversation. I think we were talking about what is immortality to you itself. Okay,
Yeah,
and we'll come back to that. We'll talk about one more state of immortality. So this is a story that ev- I think everyone is going to be familiar with the story at least in some ways. But even if you're not, that's okay. I will tell you the story. Just to give you the
So,
context.
Anupreet,
Yeah.
just
Hello.
one. This is Vikram. This side.
Hi, Vikram. Okay,
Hi. So, for me, what strikes is the honesty of the cultural honesty
that's true.
that I see. In our mythology, heroes are heroes. I mean, the cardboard heroes. There is no mistakes, or even if there are mistakes, they are not really you know. Uh, highlighted or made into a central axis of their heroship. And in these let's say Gilgamesh ka story and the cultures that these stories came from, for me, it's the maturity of these cultures. It's
Mhm.
not a juvenile culture where it's black and white. This imagine the sophistry of thought
Yeah.
in such ancient times, and let's not compare it, but then for me, I mean, it makes me very kind of Mahabharata and all are great comparisons, but otherwise the individual stories of our gods is very kiddish. I would say these guys are just superheroes, perfect. So while
You're completely
we
right.
look at perfection, these societies were looking at incorporating their strengths and weaknesses into their gods. I mean, there is a lot to think
Yeah.
about it, but it's very interesting how different societies, you know, kind of tell stories for about each other. And these stories, I personally believe, are a reflection of and justification of social transactions that are happening at any given time. So whatever is the prevalent practices, they turn into these stories and mythologies where
Mhm.
societies are justifying it to themselves,
Yeah.
their own actions. And in that light, I mean, we fall short. I mean, I think our mythology falls short. uh, yeah, so that's it.
Yeah, Vikram, I think you raised a very interesting point. To be honest, to say a certain mythology falls short, I think where the falling short is happening is that some of the nuances that were there in other mythologies have not trickled down as much. I mean, this mythology, the Mesopotamian mythology was lost and it was refounded again. The tablets were found in like few centuries back again, and people were startled by a flood myth that predated the Noah flood myth and all. Compared to one thing that's different about the Indian mythologies or Puranic mythologies, I want to call it, because there are other mythologies apart from the Purans and all in India. But the thing is that Indian mythologies have always been this thing. At no point in time the Puranic traditions and all just completely got taken away and all. So the fortunate factor we have is that our stories have got a lot of chance to evolve. Even the Mahabharata and all, there's no one, even if the Mahabharata was written first time, there is a lot of compilation and additions that have come through. So what ends up happening is that by the 5th century, when the Gupta period and all, they raised the importance of these Ramayana, Mahabharata and all. So automatically there was a cultural importance to our mythology, and it stayed with us. Compared to some of these earlier mythologies, Norse mythology and all, they got lost by with the civilization. So it's what really fascinates me is that as you mentioned, the level of maturity that is there even before in 2000 BCE sort of a thing. And despite being lost, we don't know exactly how did they worship him, or did they not worship Gilgamesh, or what did they do with it? How were these stories fun stories, or were these stories life lessons? They feel like life lessons to me, but how did the people take it, right? We don't know. So it's almost like we've got like this thing. The way I think about mythology of a lost civilization is, imagine you getting a half broken Wikipedia page of a movie with like some things completely erased off, and you trying to reconstruct how the movie would have how would you explain the movie. It's not the same. You would never know. You would not even know how the people look like and all sort of a thing. It's just that feeling, and what we are doing is basically reading the Wikipedia synthesis of something, hoping that we understand them better. So yeah, just looking at Rutakriti, you've written reputation of a person is his real reputation. That's a nice lesson that I think we can take. Great. Let's move to the last story, and thing. So the last story, I think as we made a segue, we were talking about Mahabharata and all. In fact, the story of Samudra Manthan, or the churning of ocean, comes from one of the chapters in Mahabharata. Around 5th century, CE. That's when most likely the story of Mohini and all must have come out. And Mohini is a very interesting character. She's someone who gets featured in many more stories, and she wields so much power in obviously in in her appearance, and but in a way of in her demeanor that not even forget the divine beings like asuras and devtas, but even Shiv and other gods and goddesses are completely mesmerized by her. So let's begin the story itself. Swarbhanu was getting impatient. The distribution was taking a bit too long. How come no one else was speaking about this? He looked around, and it felt like he was the only one. All his Asur brothers, their gaze were fixed upon this enchanting female figure moving between them and Devtas. Her graceful dance and movement seemed to be holding everyone in a trance. But his eyes were on what this female was holding, a pot which held the cosmic treasure that everyone sought. Patience, Swarbhanu, you will get your turn. We all will. Mohini has promised, right after Devtas, such a beauty would never lie, spoke Bali, his Asur leader. Yes, I can't wait to taste the nectar right out of her hands, chided Mahisha, another Asura brother. Swarbhanu nodded, but something didn't feel right about this moment. Something didn't feel right about her. A moment ago, both Devas and Asuras were ready to kill each other for a pot, and now they were being peacefully served by this strange, seductive woman who came out of nowhere. Everyone was speaking so hypnotically about her, but he won't have it anymore. For a brief moment, even he was equally smitten by her. Too long have they waited for this moment, and they shouldn't have to wait anymore, having to share it with their enemies, the Devtas. Yes, the Samudra Manthan, the churning of ocean, took the effort of both the groups, and all the Ratnas that came out were fairly divided by everyone. But everyone's eyes were on the final Ratna, the Amrit itself. The thing that Mohini was holding in the pot, and she was pouring it to the Devtas, who seemed to be lapping it up like thirsty dogs. And who wouldn't want it? But the rumors had it that needed Amrit more than Asuras did, as they seem to have lost all the powers when Rishi Durvasa had cursed Indra, the leader of Devtas, for not being respectful when a gift was given. Asuras were not going to let this opportunity go to wage a war against a nemesis and siege everything the Devtas had, who went to Vishnu, one of the primordial gods, for help. Typical Devtas, Swarbhanu thought. They never appreciate what they have, and and they run to their masters at the first sign of trouble. But then again, it was Vishnu who suggested that Devta should take the help of Asur and work in collaboration. Durvasa had cursed the Devtas that they will lose all their possessions and everything will go back to the seas. And Devtas were completely powerless, which is the reason Devtas had gone to Vishnu itself. And Vishnu came up with this idea. But the idea of Samudra Manthan was not going to be an easy task, or was even going to be predictable. They had almost died when Halahal, the cosmic poison, was released. Luckily, Shiv had consumed it and saved everyone. Swarbhanu never wanted to go through it again like that, and he didn't want to be dependent on a primordial god. Um, and it was more the reason he wanted to find Amrit, which is the reason everyone came in together. When Indra suggested to Bali that they work together and they get it, um, they got to the sea using the the Mount Meru, and Vasuki snake as the rope, and Vishnu became Kurd Avatar, the tortoise on which the entire spindle was balanced on. They had began to tug from both sides, churning out different ratnas that were coming out. Lakshmi had come out, Kamdhenu, the cow that gave all the wealth, Aravat had come out, other type of jewels had come out, which all the gods and everyone took for themselves. And while that was fairly divided, everyone was looking for the one thing only, and that was Amrit. So as soon as the Amrit came out, it was held by the physicians, the Devta's physician, who came up with a pot. And as soon as it came out, Swarbhanu snatched it from his hand. There was nothing the Devtas could do to get it, since they were powerless. He remembered at the time the Amrit was in his hand and he was just about to consume it. Meanwhile, in the present, Mohini twirled around rhythmically between each serving to the Devtas, passing sensual glances at the Asuras. Swarbhanu noticed how his brothers were so pleased that they did not seem to mind waiting for their turn, but he was getting frustrated. He thought about how he had the Amrit in his hand and there was no one to stop him. But it was then they saw Mohini. Her, her flawless skin Her flawless skin radiated, and she was decked up in this beautiful garment and ornaments. Taking small steps, she walked past them without uttering a word. Whispers and sniggering followed in the group around her. She stopped. Bali asked, "Who are you, my lady?" This woman just turned around. It doesn't matter who I am, but you can call me Mohini. What is this all about? What is happening here? Bali told her everything about the Samudra Manthan, about the Amrit, and all that had transpired. Haha, is that it? What seems to be the problem here then? We want it for ourselves. Mahisha, the Asur, chimed, and all Asuras agreed loudly. Just then, the Devtas had appeared on the scene. No, but we should be getting it. We want it first. Surya Dev retorted, and all Devtas agreed. Mohini laughed. Boys, why are you fighting? You should be enjoying this moment. We should be enjoying this moment together. Swarbhanu remembered how she moved close to him, and and then she reached out. As soon as she moved close to him, her voice had been the most intoxicating thing till that time, until he could get a whiff of a fragrance. He was completely mesmerized. She reached out to the pot, which he was tightly holding. If you like, I can give it to all of you. A satisfying sip to everyone. Won't you want to share it? She whispered. Before Swarbhanu could, reply, uh, Bali eagerly said, "Yes, yes, we don't mind. We would like it very much. Give it to her, Swarbhanu." Swarbhanu sighed. He still regrets giving it to her, but he had to obey his leader. Mohini smiled and she took the pot from his reluctant hands. Let's start with the Devtas. Look at them, such poor and powerless beings. I feel so sorry for them. Can't we just give them the first turn? Don't worry, I will be finishing it with all of you. Yes, yes, whatever you say, said Bali. All the Asuras seemed to agree. Mohini winked and proceeded to pour the pot into the clasped hands of Indra. A stream of golden nectar flowed. As Indra swallowed it, a radiating shine came from his skin. Swarbhanu could see Indra's body rejuvenating, and as the liquid traveled down his body parts. For a moment, everyone was excited. This was Amrit, the elixir that everyone was looking for. This was working. The other devas stood in a file next to each other as Mohini kept pouring. Everyone was happy and eager, except Swarbhanu. His mind came back to the present moment, remembering that the situation they are in right now. And it came with a terrible thought. Wait, what if there is nothing left for us Asuras? What if by the time Mohini finishes with the Devtas, there's nothing left for any of us, for me? He wanted to speak to Bali again, but knowing that Bali was completely enchanted and anyone would listen to him, he decided to do something on his own. And then it hit him. If Devas are getting their shares first, why not become a Devta? He closed his eyes and meditated. With a quick mantra, he was able to teleport and shapeshift into a Devta standing on their side. Mohini had done serving Surya and Chandradev, the Devtas that were next to Swarbhanu right now. He had to just wait quietly and no one would have been any wiser. She came right in front of him and stopped. Oh no, he thought. She recognized me. Swarbhanu smiled weakly and bowed with a gesture of clasped hands, almost to receive the Amrit. After a moment, Mohini matched his smile. She poured the Amrit down his hand. As the golden nectar, filled his hand, he got excited. The glow itself was refreshing, and he let out a laughing cackle. Big mistake. Wait a minute. Who's this guy? He's not one of us, Chandradev said. That's an Asur, said Suryadev. Swarbhanu knew he was caught. Taking his gaze off the Amrit in his hand, he looked up at Mohini. But it wasn't her in the sight. Right where she stood was Lord Vishnu in his true form, and he looked angry. Wait, what was this? He wondered. And then he understood. Looks like he wasn't the only one who had done the deceiving. Mohini, I knew it wasn't you. I knew it was someone else. He let out a noise. But it didn't matter. He had got what he needed right in his hands. Vishnu raised his hand and conjured up a serrated disc. Swarbhanu knew everything about it and what it could do. He had heard the tales of the Sudarshan chapter. Panicking, Swarbhanu quickly took the sip from his hand, and the nectar filled his mouth and gushed down his throat. Nothing could stop him now. I am immortal. Ha ha ha. He laughed as he started feeling the effect on his face and neck. Vishnu flung the weapon. In less than a moment, it sliced through Swarbhanu's neck, cleaving the head right off his body. But something strange happened. Swarbhanu could still see everything. He could still speak. He wasn't dead. The Amrit's effect had already taken place. Vishnu seemed to have understood. Yes, it may seem so, that you are immortal. But what kind of a life will it be? I curse you, Swarbhanu, that you will be wandering the cosmos for all eternity for your transgression. Since you are neither dead or complete, you will be known as Rahu, while your body will be known as Ketu, each looking to consume to be whole again, but it will never be. Swarbhanu laughed, or at least the head laughed. Transgression? I knew you was up to something from the beginning. It was your deceit, Vishnu, that started it all. Giving Devtas all the Amrit first? How is that fair? But sure, I will be Rahu. But I'm coming for you, Surya and Chandra, for ratting me out. While the mortals will look at you for cycle of life, I'll be there time and again to remind them that everything ends, even for a moment. And this is the reason why in solar eclipse, Rahu eats up the sun, and in lunar eclipse, Ketu eats up the moon. But because the body is not complete, sun and moon escape, and the Devas always remain immortal. So yeah, that was the story.
Wow. My favorite story.
Okay. So we have a question by Rajiv Thapar. Why should we underestimate your own our ancient mythology was much more mature? So, Uncle, I would say that we shouldn't be comparing in the first place. There's no question of what is to say that something is more mature. Also, different mythologies give us different teaching. I keep making this comparison. It's like the food we eat, right? To say that one cuisine is better than the other cuisine is actually kind of completely reducing and being dismissive of an entire culture. Yes, the home food for an Indian dal chawal, roti sabzi and all is good, but you can't say the same thing to a Japanese or a Chinese person, right? Each of the mythologies have their own nuances and their own level of maturity, and each of them have a different thing to teach to us at a different point of time. The problem we have is that we tend to think that knowing only our own mythology is good enough. It will it would have helped in the past, but in a global culture that we live in a world where internet and everything is there, not knowing about other mythology is actually more of a disservice to your own mythology, because when you look at other mythologies and you come back to your own, you actually learn something new altogether. At least that's what I have felt. But at the same time, everyone has their opinions about a thing. I personally love things about our mythology, and I hate some things about our mythologies. I love some things about the Greek mythology, and I hate some things about it. And you know what it goes to show me, especially when I seem to get so emotionally involved and we get so emotionally involved, is that we are very invested in it. Like, think about the movies and things we see right now. When someone dies or someone gets this thing, how we get upset. That doesn't make the importance of the story less. Even if the movie is fiction, doesn't make the emotional impact very less for us. So take it as a story, take it as a lesson, and be open to other stories. That's what I would say, and I would request everyone to try that. And when you're listening to a particular story, try to be in that mindset rather than trying to compare it to a different mindset. You will never enjoy a food when you're thinking about another food while having the same food, right? So it's the same thing. uh,
I actually wanted to mention two things, if that's okay.
yeah, go ahead.
So one was that I found it very interesting how within the same mythology there are two completely different approaches to immortality shown. So somebody mentioned the Ashwadhama story. There it was given to him as a curse that even if he wants he can't die. And here it was something that was desirable. So that was very interesting to me. And on a completely different note, since you mentioned Mohini as a character, I was wondering, always these avatars or these forms that are taken by a lot of these gods are taken for a specific purpose. And generally, once that purpose is complete, they do like either they perish or they just sort of, we don't talk about them as much except for those specific instances. So I was always fascinated by why Mohini continue to show up in a lot of stories. If you know anything about that, then I'd love to know.
So, as a matter of fact, I do. So the thing is, you have to first of all remember that mythology was never written the way we consume it. Like we are consuming it in a linear fashion, as if like each story had a purpose. But to be honest, think about mythology as like five different people coming up with different stories in different time in a different region, and someone coming and compiling it, and then like someone else saying, "Hey, that's a great idea." So many of the elements you see in a story are actually a part of another story, and they just got merged together. So we are kind of like it's almost like a pizza baking sort of a thing. Like what we are when we take a bite of the pizza, we are we feel that we are taking the full bite of the bread, sauce, everything and all. But we never know, in like a mythology, a metaphorical pizza would have been constructed over the centuries, where something else would have been added at God knows what time and a different situation. So with Mohini, right, what's interesting is that there is a many studies and all. Again, I can't attest to it because there's always a there's always a debate about it. But Mohini could have been a lot earlier form that got synthesized into the Vishnu, the Vaishnavic traditions. So the Dash avatars, right? Many of the avatars were actually again, I'm talking about anthropologically speaking, not mythologically speaking. Anthropologically, and many of these were their own gods, probably of a tribe and all, and they just got mixed into it. It's like saying that, oh, that god, that also was actually Vishnu's avatar. And Hinduism is very amazing in doing that. There the best thing that Hinduism has always done is that it's like if we want to like show dominance over another culture, it's like we won't fight you, but we will say that your mythology is our mythology. So that's a very different and a smart way of changing the narrative altogether. So in that aspect, I do feel that Mohini may have been another femme fatale figure and a divine figure, that she was there, and she was kind of bought into Vishnu. But by the time she was bought in, the Dash avatars were already formalized. Probably in the thousand CE and all. So Mohini just became like a sort of a switch that Vishnu did. Uh, so I think that's how it does come. I also think that it. I mean, to be honest, many of our stories have a sort of a male gaze and a sexist tendencies. Like the stories may always, the women's ultimate power is her, is her sexual appetite or a sexual, sultriness sort of a thing. And you don't get to hear more about her personality and characters. But at the same time, some of these characteristics have become, iconic and all. So from a feminist lens, you can also see someone like Mohini, someone like Supnakha, someone like all these people as women who were comfortable with their own self, and they didn't bow down to the patriarchal rules. That's how you can see it.
Fair enough, yeah.
I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it does. Thanks a lot.
Sure. So Satish has asked, how immortality differs from Amrit to the boon, like Sapta Chiranjeev, who lived differently. That's a good question. I personally don't have an answer. From my understanding, Amrit is something that can be consumed by everyone, but the Chiranjeevi, the sort of a boon being given by someone, I think the rules are slightly different. First of all, that person has to be very pious, and the thing like that person has to um should not have karmic debt. That there should be no karmic debt and all. But having said that, I don't think there is a very clear answer, Satish. I do feel that mythology stories have been constructed as it goes, so the story rules keep changing. Um, what you can simply do is make the rules very, very clear for the story, the retelling you're doing. So, like an example, for the Norse story I was telling you, there is no in the scriptures. There's no clear mention that it is actually an apple. It could have been any berries and all, because Scandinavia didn't have apples till during the time of Vikings and all. The apples must have come very late. So it's probably the Christians who were like, "Oh, we have an apple in our story, so it must have been apple in their story too." But in my retelling, I felt that Idunn is not important at all. If her apples, why can't Thyadji just take the apple? So in my retelling, I added the fact that she could touch an apple and make it golden, so she's required. So this is what storytellers do, and I think the mythologies, any mythologies do, and I would encourage everyone to do that whenever you're telling a story, to add your layer, to add your truth, to add your rules to the story to make it more interesting. Uh, but having said that, it doesn't mean that any retelling is wrong. Look, I mean, I can tell you what goes on this, the earlier scriptures and what is mentioned, but to be really honest, um, it will be very diluted, and at the same time, there are so many versions. Which version do you want to go with? So think of this retelling as another version, while obviously trying to touch upon all the important story elements and story parts. So yeah, I think that answers the questions, and I will go to. So yeah, I just want to conclude with a couple of things. So I want to talk about immortality, and I think Naga and many of you brought this very interesting point. So if you look at immortality, how we looked at it, first of all, the idea of immortality is basically a yearning to defy nature or the natural course of life. But how it's shown in the three stories is very different, and the reason for it is very different. So for Idunn, the story, the reason for immortality, the need for immortality is actually a very functional thing. We needed to protect ourselves. The Aesir's will lose the battle against everyone if they don't have immortality. They don't have the youth and the vigor that is needed. So it's a functional, it's a functional security, and it is basically to save a system that the system that is working. While Gilgamesh is for an emotional security. Gilgamesh is feeling so bleak about his life. He feels like everything is lost, and he wants to just believe that he will live on. He doesn't want to end like Enkidu and all. He wants to say and sort of a thing, a very relatable fear that we have. And he wants to break the system. He doesn't want to be in the cycle of life and death and all. Okay. Uh, Meanwhile, Mohini's story is a very political security. I mean, the Devas want the Amrit so that they don't. They have a balance, they have a balance of power again. And the reason Mohini or Vishnu is helping the ultimately makes a very, very sly and a political move by trying to get two parties to work, but only helping one party, kind of like many of our politicians nowadays. But this is also to do with to do the fact that the three gods, Vishnu, Brahma, and Shiv, are trying to sustain the system. They know that this is going to keep happening. There are going to be times where the Asuras are going to win, and there are going to be times where the Devas are going to win. So the reason they sometimes even do these political, very ambiguous moves is because they know that they have to just sustain the system. It's all going to happen. This is just going to keep happening. And I think that shows us the different reasons why the mythologies have shown for the reason of immortality and all. It's a very interesting reflection I found from it. And what I really found from all the stories is that immortality, or at least the concept of biological immortality, the idea of living again and all, can be as much a curse as blessing. In each of the stories, I mean, think about Idunn. She is always a target, right? Gilgamesh, feels the need to have this, and then he feels that he's not enjoying life as much, and it's towards his end of his life he feels like okay, I'm going to live through my reputation. Mohini and all also, like, I mean, the what the Devas had gone through and all, it's not easy. And as you mentioned about Ashwatthama, immortality can be a curse. It's about how you take it. I think it goes back to the fact that, how you see life, altogether. And I think that's very important because we began this new year, and I think the vaccine is coming. There are a lot of concerns and all, which I think obviously, shouldn't be, because, it'll go through its, scientific checks and all. But I think it's also important to talk about our own emotional, the need that we have. 2020 got us to a point where a lot of us not just had physical and physiological and like a security crisis at a the Maslow's hierarchy of need, like at a physiological and a security level, but also at a at a self-actualization level. We didn't know what this means for us, what this is going to be, how is the world going to change, and we yearned for this thing to solve us, this idea of vaccine. In fact, many of us blamed 2020. 2020 was the curse, right? 2020 was death, or it was basically the halal, where we just wanted 2020 to end so that we will become immortal again in 2021. But I think when we do that, the thing that we forget about is, what is it that we are actually seeking out? What is the need? And looking at the stories, there are three things we're basically seeking out. We are looking at obviously, our body and our families to be safe and sound and healthy, but we're also looking at the other two things which don't get talked about, is the emotional security. We want to feel safe. We want to feel that we know the world, and at the same time, we want to believe that whatever, while everything has happened, the situation in the world, things that are happening in the world, things that are happening in America, things that are happening in India, things, there is a lot of, there's a lot of political divide, there's a lot of fault lines and all, and we forget about it. We want to forget about that, but we have to acknowledge the reality that there is a lot of other problems and all, and someone needs to help sustain that. So yeah, that was. So yeah, that was the end of the session. I wanted to conclude with a couple of things. One is this line that just stood out to me. I hope if you've not seen the movie, see 127 Hours. It's about a rock climber who gets stuck between a rock and has to find a way to get out of it. But I love the tagline of the movie, which was, "The strongest will to live is a will to survive." And I think that's something that we should take with us through 2021. Remember that in all this, even the concept of mythologies, why have we written mythologies? It's a way for us to say that we lived here. As we were talking about some of the ancient civilizations and all, they have gone. The people who wrote that thing, they have gone, but they have kind of survived through their stories. And I think that's the point of a human thing. We want to go against entropy. We want to say that, like, through our art, through our mythology, through our stories and all, we want to say that we were here and we lived. So yeah. So I want to give the illustration credits. A lot of the illustrations and all, again, were not done by me. As much as I would love to do my own illustrations, and I'm planning to, it just is not feasible right now. So I took it from different channels, Google, DeviantArt, ArtStation, and obviously Indian mythology had to come from a TV show, which you must have guessed. But it was something very interesting. I would definitely urge you guys that whenever you're looking at mythologies, check out different paintings and all. It completely changes your perspective about it. Don't just look at the ancient paintings. Don't just look at the original scriptures. Look at the modern tellings, how people have depicted someone and something. It tells you a lot more about the culture than just looking at the ancient original scriptures and all.
Just like the tarot cards.
Sorry, what?
Just like the tarot cards.
Exactly. Yeah, that's. And I also want to make an announcement, since people are here. I'm also going to be so Mythematical. This was a 10th session, and I'm so glad that all of you guys were able to attend it and be here. And I know we all share a love for mythology. But if any of you have any love, or you're someone who's very curious to know about prehistory, history that before history was written. So prehistory is the time where history wasn't documented. And I keep saying this, that especially in India, our history just dissolves into mythology, and we don't know anything beyond that. We don't even know what kind of creatures lived in on Earth. A lot of people don't even know that there are famous dinosaurs in India. On how did our land, the landmass, evolve and all. how was life constructed? How did life evolve? So I'm going to cover a lot of that in prehistory. I'm going to make it India specific in many ways, because I feel that while this is covered extensively in this thing, so about what happened. Like there are museums dedicated to like prehistory and all in US and other places and all. There is a lot of effort going on in India, but I do feel that they don't get enough voice and coverage. So I want to bring that up. The other series is called Cosmonomic. That's going to be me traversing through the astronomical backyard. I mean, we are a small planet in in a solar system that is one of the solar system in the entire, one of the billion solar systems in the galaxy, which is one of the billion galaxies in the entire universe. And also, we are a very small this thing. We're basically a carbon speck, right? So there's a lot to explore, lot to do that. And I think I want to talk a lot about the, what is the world like, how we looked at space, especially again looking at the the Indian point of view and how we saw it. What do we know about the stars and all, and also look at the space exploration stories. We know about the NASA's and sort of a thing, and I will be covering NASA and a lot. But what about ISRO? How has ISRO evolved? I mean, there's a reason why ISRO was able to do the Mars mission and all. So I'm going to be covering and coming up with stories. It's going to be very different in format. It's not going to be like Mythematical only. I'm still figuring that out. But I thought I'll make this announcement. Please have a look and all. And the last but not the least, please follow Mythematical. I've now opened its own account. Not just doing it through my own channel now, but doing that. And I do want to mention that I'm doing this on my own completely, and I'm keeping things as much free as possible. I'll be doing paid sessions also, but I do want to keep an open session. I do want to allow. I don't want to keep a wall which is only for academics and all. This thing, I want to keep it interactive, but for me to do that, I want to make it sustainable. So I would request, if any of you are interested and any of you can support Mythematical, please do it. I am open on Patreon. You can become a Patreon member at a different tier, for monthly subscriptions and all. What's more is there will be exclusive perks and all. There will be exclusive content for Patreon members and all, and at whatever level you have. So starting with like $3 to $5 to whatever you have, and please share it with people who may be interested. It'll mean a massive help for me, because I do plan to make this a more full-fledged thing, and I want to be doing this more regularly and all. So yeah, that's it. And as I would say, inspire and indulge curiosity. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time. Any questions? Anything else you guys?
I really love the session.
Thank you. Please tell more people about it. I'll be doing more sessions, probably doing another session in this month. And I'm going to be covering a lot of, lesser known Indian mythologies and all also. So, stories that people don't know about. So that could be. Satish, you have a question. Can you present topic on yogas? I'll do that. I'll be presenting on different time units and all. I have a long plan. Hopefully, I'll cover everything. But yeah, that's. I'll stop sharing right now. So hope you all enjoyed it, and hope you have a good weekend. I know my weekend has been pretty intensive, but I think I'm very energized because of the sessions. So yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anupreet. Thank you.
Thank you, Anupreet.
Again, so much knowledge in this.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.